At other schools, I think by the sixth or seventh year or 10th year after the school was opened, uh, there seemed to be a pool of minority staffing coming, teachers coming along that I never felt I was being rated upon. The only way that I felt was just an ordinary, you know, like Rafael moves on from counselor to a principalship under his own, you know, brilliance.
So what about administrators?
But in terms of, like for example, central office administrators, I had a positive relationship with them, and they understood for the most part what I was trying to do. And as long as the school wasn't experiencing public demonstrations or staffing, then probably one of the biggest challenges was that you ended up being, I always had the feeling that they wanted me to be more of a team player, even in terms of teaching staffing, as teachers' unions, for example. They did not want you to come hard, and fire teachers, even if they were, having a hard time in the classroom. And that's the only experience I felt in which, I think the word got around toward the end of my tenure, that maybe I wasn't someone that was too cooperative, although I tried to be as cooperative as I could, and that included even classical staffing. I got to the point where in classical staffing, as an example of what I'm trying to say, is that I had a complaint from teachers their classroom was not being cleaned properly. And then I went and checked and ran my finger over cabinets, and sure enough, they hadn't been done. So I talked to the custodian and told him, that I wanted to see an improvement. Well, it dragged on and nothing was happening, and because I went back and checked again, running a finger, 3 or 4 weeks later, nothing had changed. And so I took him to the district office personnel, and I was told by at a board meeting, because he complained. We were at a board meeting with board members, and I wanted to get this man moved, and he didn't want to move. And I said, he's got to improve, otherwise I don't want him on my staff. I was told when it was all over, by a central office administrator, he said, the board does not like to see this type of situation come up before them. That's just a word to the wise. And if it had been a classified teacher, God only knows what would have happened. So the system in itself, it just, wants the status quo. And if you come along and with your own ideas, then you could end up finding yourself the principal of continuation school.
And that happened.
What changed was the school board became more representative of the school district. You ended up at one point with Frank Fiscalini retired. We ended up with a black superintendent, and he brought in 2 top-level administrators with him, the assistant superintendent of instruction, and assistant superintendent of personnel, 3 blacks on a 5-board meeting, 5-board of education. And so as more minorities joined, including Hispanic board members, I think that had a huge impact on hiring practices and solutions.
What were the names of some of those first board members?
Well, Henry Gage was a first black board member, and then there was Sawyer, who was the second one. I forget his first name, but his last name was Sawyer, a male. We ended up with a black female board member that I can't think of her name at the moment, and so we had 3. And then the same thing among Hispanics. We ended up Tony Carrillo from San Jose State, and then Rafael, maybe you can think of some, besides Tony. I know we ended up with at least 2 others.
Yeah.
But not at the same time. And so, but they focused on student needs. I think the board became more representative and focused on the needs of students. I never felt that I was being investigated by board members. When they came on campus, they had nice discussions and they walked around and did whatever they do, board members.
As a result of the board members changing, how did the administration change?
Well, they became, as I said, the first black superintendent was appointed, and was there for about 4 years. Then moved on to a bigger district, and then we ended up with the first Hispanic superintendent, Jocoto. And also the focus then was, I thought, meeting the needs of all students. But since the Hispanic population was about 35% of the total school district, or possibly slightly higher than that, we focused more on the needs of students. The connection with parents, I think, needed a lot more attention.
Excuse me.
Barbara Dawson, who started as assistant principal of
Student services, student support services.
of PSS, went on to become a principal. She was at Underhill. That's where she began. Rafael Renteria ended up at Silver Creek. Manny Morales came in, and he was principal of Mount Pleasant. And then we ended up with a couple of white women principals.
Carol Lee
At
Selby.
James Lake.
Who were they?
Carol Lee Selby at Santa Teresa, and Kathy Jamona at James Lake.
Yeah.
That was about that time.
How about women members?
I can't think of anybody.
Members of CASA. I think Dolores Chavez was a member of CASA, but she was not necessarily an administrator.
Yeah, she's a counselor.
She was a counselor, right?
And out at the classroom, and very active.
Yeah, we're talking about Alicia Mandeque, who was.
She was principal of Yerba Buena
at
after
Yerba Buena High
she was
School.
named principal of Yerba Buena after me, after I had moved to the district office.
Where did she come from?
Pilpitas, originally, and then worked in the district office coordinating a federal program.
Were there any organizations that you were involved in besides the official district mechanisms?
I think probably the strongest one and the one that was most active was the ESALE Association of
Latino teachers.
Latino educators, and then there was one that was the administrators, which was CASA.
CASA.
So those two organizations were very key in terms of working with the whole issue of addressing the lack of teachers in the population.
The East Side Latino group, was that ESALE?
ESALE, correct. ESALE Association.
What did
of
they
Latino
do?
Educators. Well, as a group, we participated very much actively in the committee, on the affirmative action committees, and we gave a lot of input through that. As a matter of fact, I became a member of the committee, and eventually I was the chair of the affirmative action committee for the district. And I think that originally the connection was that it was through the ESALE and my association with that group that put me in that position, which that in terms kind of, we looked at the challenges that we were having in terms of hiring minorities. And some of the attitudes of administrators, key administrators, that were not very positive. We had to deal with it, and there was a time when, like for example, Tino Noriega, which was the administrator in charge of the Affirmative Action Committee, we made a lot of progress. Later on, there was another administrator, which will remain unnamed, which changed the concept. Instead of reflection of student population, he said the intent of the law was to reflect the employee population, which, I mean, when it came down to it, pretty close to small number in minority employees in the field of education, and that was the goal. That became the goal. We had some heated discussions and arguments, and even before the board. But, I mean, that's what it was like. So that was one of the biggest challenges that we had.
What was CASA?
It was the Chicano Association of School Administrators. And the function was to be supportive, much like ESALE, in terms of if you didn't have discussions right there at the formal meetings, you knew you could call someone, another co-administrator who had a similar problem, and it was a question of basically of what are the issues in solving this particular problem. You know, for example, we were always conscious of the fact that there was a high rate of suspension of minority students. And so how is that addressed at the different schools? And we'd have frank discussions as to what we could do to reduce that, what did reduce mean? How are we going to meet the needs of those students? You know, it's an issue that's relevant right now and has been in the newspapers, including the New York Times had an article on it. You know, the high rate of suspensions among black students back east in some of these cities. And they've gotten to the point now where there's going to be a change in the law. Apparently you can't suspend them for classroom disruption, but if you can't suspend them for classroom disruptions, what are you going to do with them? And that will become probably a holding class of some kind on the campus for students instead of suspending them.
Who were some of the members of that group? Were they all was CASA an organization of Eastside District administrators or regional people?
Well, I think it was more regional, including San Jose Unified School District. They would attend some of the meetings to meet some of the same goals and needs that I just described to you. So it was kind of a reflection of the California School Administrators organization. We were all members of that. So our experiences, for example, I was at one point the president of the CASA regional chapter, which included other school districts and other members in the whole Santa Clara County. And I think Rafael might have been one too.
Any other names, members of CASA?
Okay. We mentioned Pete Mesa, who was principal, the first Latino principal of San Jose High School, about the same time that I was at Yerba Buena. And then he became deputy superintendent of schools with Paul Sakamoto, who was an EC. And then he went from deputy superintendent at Mountain View Los Altos High School to superintendent of Milpitas. And from Milpitas, he went on to become superintendent of Oakland.
Other members?
Paul Sakamoto was probably the first minority high school principal in the Valley. He was principal of Sunnyvale High School, then went on to become superintendent of Mountain View Los Altos Union High School District.
Other Latino administrators?
Jess Sanchez, who became principal of Los Altos High School until he retired from that position.
What kinds of work did you do with parents during those years?
Okay. We tried to go under Title I, a parent group. You had to have a parent group in each school, representative of the students that would be in the Title I programs, which was basically focused on reading and math, the English portion of reading. And getting them to attend meetings with potluck dinners, with activities, it's still, you ended up with a small cadre of parents who were active and attended every meeting. But the vast majority of the parents simply didn't attend the meetings. Even when you sent flyers with their students, recommended that the parents attend, those are the real social issues that need to be addressed. We sent flyers home for attendance at the meetings we were there. I was there at the meetings as a principal. I could speak to the parents in Spanish if necessary, and tell them about the school, take them on a tour of the campus so that they knew what their students confronted, what the things that we make the students feel at home and the parents feel at home. That was the basic goal, so that they could drop by anytime they wanted to. Now, what was achieved was very small. But if you compare that to previous experiences, like my experience at Peterson as a vice principal, if a kid had a problem at Peterson High School, somebody was there the next day, mother or father, asking why and wanted to know, and they wanted to talk to teachers. I want you to explain to me why my son is failing when he's going to Stanford next year. His father went there, he's got a scholarship there. I had a parent tell me that. And I just said, well, he's not doing his homework. This is the records indicating he's not doing his homework. He's attending school, but he's not attending his homework. So those are, and parents and teachers, of course, faculty meetings, individual conferences with teachers to have them. I felt comfortable enough by my fourth or fifth year that the parents, the staff had a focus on what one of my goals was driven, because they tell me. I had a teacher once tell me, I know your focus is on the students and you don't really care about us teachers. I said, no, of course I care about you, because you are the people that the students meet every day. You're very important in this concept.
Tell me about working with the parents in those years.
I think one of the biggest challenges that I saw was that there was, even with the parents, I mean, there was a belief system that their kids actually could not do it. They worked on the idea that I as a parent was not able to do that kind of work. I did not understand algebra. Was not able to read those kind of things. It says, my pobre hijito or hijita, they're the same. They cannot. That was frustrating to me. Changing that mental set is something that requires a lot, and it's been a very difficult thing to do.